Hello everyone, welcome to UFO Enigma. I'm Ron Rickey, your host. Now in today's show, I think we're going to cover some recent sightings. Some of you have been asking what's new in the UFO field now. So I've dug up a few stories from various newspaper clippings. And the first story comes from the Indianapolis Star, and it was date-lined November 22nd, 1993. And this story here concerns the kind of strange goings-on in a little Indiana town. It's right on the Illinois border, called Monroe City. And according to this report, strange occurrences have been happening quite frequently for the last 20 years or so. Now, there have been reports of a ghost, a female ghost, a Bigfoot-type creature, which, if I might just drift to the side a little bit, Bigfoots have been sighted in just about every state in the Union. But most of the activities around Monroe City here concern reports of these nocturnal lights. Now, most of these sightings occurred, they sort of focused themselves in and around a place called Lucky Point. Now, it's a local Lover's Lane type of a place in the area. And investigators, they claim that, especially one from MUFON, he collected some 250 reports in the last 20 years. Now, that's pretty good. That's maybe a little bit less than one a month. And as I said, this was a MUFON investigator. And the lights seem to have come from a variety of sizes, shapes, colors, and there were some reports of landings and contacts. But in this particular case here, it was more or less discounted by the MUFON people. And that sort of, gets me a little wondering, because during the famous Gulf Breeze, Florida sightings, the MUFON outfit was very interested in contacts, even more so over the actual sightings of these lights in the sky. So I got a little chat on this particular sighting here, and we'll just go over this. And this is a small report, and it was in Monroe City. It has been a hot spot for some 20 years now. That almost sounds like that little town in New York that we did a show on, was Pine Ridge, I think it was, where they've been hearing rumblings in the ground and spotting animals that weren't supposed to be in that area, like finding a polar bear in the desert or something. And there's been 250 reports, and there was reports of ghosts, Bigfoot, and flying saucers, and it was investigated, like I said, by MUFON and probably some other local UFO organizations. Okay, so that more or less takes care of that little article. Now, the next one is kind of an interesting article. It might or it might not fit in with the past two shows that I've just completed on UFO and the American Indian. And this particular sighting is from the Dakota Student. I would imagine it's a college newspaper from the University of North Dakota. Now, this is in Grand Forks. The article is dated November 19th, 1993, which puts it right up there with a nice recent article. And I'm pretty sure this particular story has been covered on TV. It seems familiar, and I don't know if I saw it like on Robert Stack's show last year or not, but it's about a college professor there named John Salters. And the story tells of his, it's a pretty good sized article, and the story more or less dealt with his involvement in the civil rights movement back in the 60s, and other such little background things on him, and saying that he was a professor of Indian studies at the University of North Dakota. Now, it also tells of his UFO experiences, and which is what we're interested here. This one actual episode here, or a series of events, was dated May 20th, 1988, and went on to say that Salters and his son were driving from North Dakota to Louisiana. Now, they were driving, making the trip down, and he was supposed to do a speaking engagement in Louisiana. Now, somewhere along the line, they wound up in Wisconsin, where Salter said he was abducted by aliens, and even had a place where they were from. It was from the Zeta Reticuli solar system, which I think we've heard too on past stories. And once aboard this spaceship, he and his son were given the usual medical tests, and they also met with several UFOnauts on the spaceship. Now, this professor claimed that he got the impressions that these people are friendly. They're a friendly race, and from what he gathered, they were here on peaceful purposes. Both Salter and his son were released after a while aboard the ship, and they were released with an induced amnesia. Now, if you've been following along the story, you'll find that's quite common. These people pick someone up and do tests, talk with them, show them stuff, show them around the ship and whatever, and say, well, when you leave, we're going to have to just, blank this out of you, this last few hours out of your memory. Now, both of these men, which is a little bit different here, they recall the episode on their own. In other words, the hypnosis, so maybe a shot or something they were given, wore off, and they could start remembering what happened. Now, the story also goes along saying that Salter was had the belief that he had been abducted on 3 previous occasions. Now, the article also claims that the story was, this hasn't exactly endeared him with some of his colleagues at the university, and some of these guys want him out because I guess, the Enigma still has an enigma attached to it. Now, the story goes on and says that if nothing else, this Salter's had a very, very colorful career. And it says that he intends to continue his lifestyle, which I would mean, I would take to mean that he's going to give lectures on UFOs and whatever. He's not going to change his style whatsoever, whether he leaves the university or not. Now, needless to say, this is a pretty interesting little article, and if I could add, this particular story shows the real cross-section that of people that these events happen to, and they happen from the average man or woman on the street to a man that's a college professor. I mean, no one seems to be immune if they're targeted from these guys and their tests and whatever. So that was a nice little story out of North Dakota, and the next story was a neat little story here from Connecticut. So we're getting pretty close to home here. It's a nice little story here from the Connecticut Post of Bridgeport, and this was dated on October 11th, 1993. And this is an abduction. It was this girl lives in Connecticut, and now she spoke at a conference held last fall, and it was the 6th International Conference on the UFO Experience held at North Haven, Connecticut. Now, on the same card, so to speak, at this conference was Travis Walton, who also spoke, and spoke of his experiences. Now, we've covered Travis Walton pretty extensively, and we'll get back to this lady's story. She was a co-speaker here. Now, she claimed that this happened on November 30th, 1989. And as she related it, she said she was floated right out a bedroom window in her apartment to an awaiting flying saucer. Now, what's a little more startling on this particular story here is that the apartment was 12 stories above the ground in a Manhattan high-rise, and there was plenty of witnesses around. So the story claims that it was witnessed by some people on the ground, including a prominent political figure, which they didn't name. Now, this lady told the people at the UFO conference here that, you know, she wasn't really happy about the whole thing. She claimed she threw a pillow at one of these smallish type aliens as they whisked her out of her bed and into this waiting UFO. Now, if I may slide a little bit back to Walton's case, when Walton was abducted, he fought them quite vigorously, and I'm sure if you saw Fire in the Sky or even read the book or any articles on the Walton story, Walton wasn't very happy about being captured either. And now this lady was quoted as saying that it wasn't the actual thing of being abducted. She said what she was most objected to was she felt her sense of privacy and security and safety was just wiped right out. You know, someone can walk into your room, put a spotlight on you or whatever, or put some levitation machine on you and take you right away. And the story didn't give too many actual details of the incident. I would imagine that the Walton thing was probably the main headline story on that one there, but it also did mention that Bud Hopkins was at the conference, and now we've covered Bud Hopkins too, and he's a researcher, big name in the business today, and has a book out telling of his regressing of some 60 people around the world, in the country and around the world, and their stories were so alike as to the description of the aliens and the description of the ship that took them up. He more or less took all this yarn and knitted something out of it. And at the conference here, he claimed that there's 2 new cases of abductions brought to his attention every day. Now, the next sighting comes from a report in the Ledger of Gaffney, South Carolina, and the date is November 12th, 1993. Now, according to this article, this is a nice little article because it involves an area around an airport, and The article was published pretty quickly after it had happened, probably 2 or 3 days. And as I mentioned, now it shows how many times have you looked off like over the horizon and seen like a real bright light, and you watch it, and it seems to more or less stand still, and you'd watch it and watch it, and all of a sudden you realize it's a plane coming at you. And these big landing lights, if you really can't see the little lights around them, the strobe lights and the flashes that they carry, you could, probably be confused with the whole thing. And I gotta stray a little bit from the story before I report the story. It says, being near an airport. Now, most of these reports, I think there was 4 of them mentioned in this particular report here. There's also a nice description of UFO in this one. But people that are around an airport, I think that it's pretty hard to fool these people. They're seeing planes landing daily and nightly, night and day. I guess it's big enough where big airliners come in, so there's activity all day long. And I'm pretty sure it's hard to fool them. Now, the major part of this article, it concerns the sighting of 2 women coming in. They were coming home from work. Now, this was a night sighting, and it said 11:30 p.m. So this was in a town called McConnells, South Carolina. And goes like this. Now, these 2 girls were driving home from work, and the first thing they noticed was a bank of lights shining clear and very bright, and it looked like the thing was hovering. Now, one girl, I guess the girl that was the passenger, made mention about a hovering light, but like I said, if a plane is coming at you, for a certain amount of time, it will look like it's standing still because it's coming at you and not moving more or less parallel to your eyesight. And they went on now to describe this. This seems to be a new, actually quite frequently description now. They described it as bright burning lights, more or less at the end of this vehicle. The lights were more visible than I think the actual body of the ship. Now, I more or less made up my own impression, and I drew the outline of the ship in dotted lines because they really didn't see it. But they saw color there, so I would imagine there was something reflecting these lights. All right, well, we had these very brightly burning lights on the end, and there was a connecting bar in the middle, and that must have been, I think that was lighted too. And they said, aside from the real brightness of the lights in the bar, the main body of the ship had a reddish tinge to it. Now, okay, so now they're slowing down and they're seeing this this UFO. Now they're starting to see it move. So evidently it's starting to go with them, like, across their field of vision. And they lost sight of it for a few seconds because it was flying so low. Now, they kept watching, and I guess they kept on driving, and it came into view again. And I guess there was a clearing in the landscape, and maybe it went over a field or something. Now, one of the women said that it was flying really slow now. And, of course, air controllers and stuff would say, well, big airliners look like they're almost standing still when they're coming in because they're so big. And even at 120, 130 miles an hour, these things look like they're just drifting in. But we'll get to that after. Now, it was flying very slow, and they thought it was too low to be an airplane. Now, that more or less goes back to where I say that it's pretty hard to fool someone that's seen these things, that sees airplanes every day. They know what it looks like. So they said they thought it was too low and they could hear no noise at all. Now, up until this part of the story, I would concede, it could have. They could have been mistaken on a man-made object. Could have been an airliner or a small plane or anything. If it was a small plane, you wouldn't have heard any real noise unless it was close. And if it was that close, you would have probably identified it as a plane. Okay, now back to this sighting. As the thing is coming slow over the horizon line, the woman said the object sort of crossed right in front of them. And it came right in front of the car. How many times have we covered stories like this, especially, in fact, I can't remember the name, but the one that happened up in New Hampshire there where the thing just drifted right down in front of the car. But, okay, now they said they really couldn't tell how close it was, but it looked very close. Now, if it was real close, they didn't give any details here on the what they thought the size was. But, if it's real close, it's smaller, and if it's far away, it'll be a bigger object. Okay, now, on getting a real good look at this now, I would imagine they must have stopped the car and looked at this. They said it started to slow down, and as it did slow, it more or less dimmed to a deep, it was like a purple glow. And then they said, well, I really couldn't do the description justice, but there was a purple glow around the bar and with a greenish tinge. I would have to say it's a colorful object. And now after a few seconds, they got a good look at it, and the object brightened up, and it just, boom, disappeared right off into the night sky. Now, that's to my way of thinking. This part of this UFO story, it seems to discount the landing airplane theory. I mean, a big airplane wouldn't come right over the car and sit there. Even a helicopter wouldn't. Now, I would say this puts us into a good UFO category of sightings. Now, there was even backup. This was a pretty nice, for a short amount of time, this was a pretty nice little sighting. And the article then told of another woman who witnessed a brightly lighted object at about the same time these two girls were coming home from work. And from reading what the newspaper had down, I would say they were looking at the same object. And the second lady here now, she described hers as a group of lights. Now, she didn't say exactly how it was grouped, but as her report went on, she said it looked too big to be an airplane. And now, here's the clincher that ties in the two stories here. Between the bright lights, which I would mean actually corresponds to what the first two ladies said, between these two lights, she said there was a bank of connecting lights. And, gee, I mean, two different locations, and up until this point, three reliable witnesses. And it was so striking, the descriptions between the two reports, especially with the connecting bar. That more or less shows that they were looking at the same object from different locations. Now, the story claimed that the Rock Hill Herald also reported that two more people witnessed the object at about the same time. Now, I would imagine this Herald was a little local paper, and they were taking some stories from local witnesses. And they tied the time down between now three different three different people, three different groups of people at three different locations. Now, the rest of the article went on more or less and brought in theories from local experts who range from astronomers to air traffic control people. Now, I'm sure, you know, with the airport there is abundance of really expert people to get some information from. Now, they more or less whitewashed the whole thing, and they gave, more or less just gave you the descriptions of the lights used by aircraft, and being the large landing lights, which we went over, and the strobe lights. You can see them when they go over your house, the white lights, and the flashing red and greens that they also run. Now, the so-called experts also more or less described the various altitudes used by these aircraft while making their approach to the airport. And a report of inquiry, I guess, by the local newspapers said that local police and the local 911 people claimed that there were no unusual reports of UFOs that night. Now, it seems that the witnesses themselves more or less discounted telling the police, discounted telling, calling the airport, and just went to the papers and told about it. Now, I believe the witnesses in this particular case did observe a bona fide UFO, especially when the first two women claimed that when the object approached them, it slowed down and dimmed. Now, how many times have we heard that during the course of this show? And hovered for a while, and then when it was ready to take off, the whole ship seemed to brighten up, or either the ship or the lights on it. And when it's gone in a matter of an eye blink. And I think they had a pretty good sighting, and I think that this rates a closer inspection by outfits like MUFON. So that sort of wraps up these little stories. Now, for next week, I think I'm going to, we're going to go a little bit into maybe some foreign sightings. I'd like to get maybe into the corn crop or the wheat field circles, and we'll discuss those a little bit and see if we can get some information on them. Until then, just watch for more. Keep watching. We'll see you later.